comes from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 5 through 8. But you be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. You may be seated.
What a wonderful and beautiful day we have to come together and worship God today. Amen. Glad you are here. We are thankful for every member here and all of our guests as well. We do have visitors. Hope you won't be last-time visitors. Some of you may be first-time, but come back and see us. Tonight at 5 o'clock, we'll be worshiping again, looking at Pontius Pilate. Actually, a two-part. We'll look at him getting into the trial, the crucifixion of Jesus. I'm looking forward to studying. Pray that you'll come and be our guest as well. At the end of service, in fact, after our closing prayer, I'll ask all of you to remain seated. We want to spend some time acknowledging and recognizing our veterans. Some of our guests are here today because of a relative maybe that has been in service, and we're especially thankful you're here. And on the sheet, you may have noticed, more probably will be said about this. After this evening's worship tonight, there will be a reception. We have some cake and coffee. All veterans are welcome. Your families, in fact, all members are welcome to stay as well. But that will be an informal time of showing again our appreciation to you. So I'm thankful for those opportunities that we have. With your Bible open to 2 Timothy chapter 4, you might look back at that passage there and think about Paul, who was a veteran in the Lord's army. We are all, as Christians, in the Lord's army. There's that comparison in the Bible, that imagery that's developed, and that's the best army to be in. Some of you, different branches you've served in, have a special pride, and you'll defend that and feel a special camaraderie with others who have been in that particular branch. But all of us can be in the Lord's army. Paul was a great soldier. As you think about him being in a Roman prison, and the last grains of sand trickling through that hourglass. Here's a brave soldier of the cross who is giving parting directions again to this young minister that he loved so much. And actually could say, as we think about those immortal words, I have fought the good fight. There are a lot of people fighting today. They're not fighting the right fight. It's not a good one at all, but Paul could have the consolation, as he has a clear conscience and a strong faith and abiding love, that he has lived a life that has been pleasing to God. He's about to join the ranks of those who would be not only veterans, but as we even think about our own congregation, some last year honored on Veterans Day. Now it's Memorial Day for them. And so Paul, who's been gone nearly 20 centuries, is only gone in physical body. His spirit was with God, and he had that confidence that we need to think about even now. As we think about, again, that farewell to Timothy, so much by way of just the closing farewells and parting information. Paul would have given that to Timothy. Timothy read it over and over and shared this message, not just as a personal correspondence, but with many others, including us, that go back and think about it. There have been a lot of decorated soldiers before Paul. Some of those we look at in the Old Testament. I think about an Abraham and David. Several others that met great resistance and overcame personal odds with God's help, secure a victory. And there have been some great soldiers even after Paul. But I want to think about him as a special, deserving of an honorable memorial that we can give him today. I fought the good fight. In that first epistle to Timothy, he would say in chapter 1, verse 18, to fight the good fight of faith. He's encouraging not him to begin for the first time, but to continue doing that. And in the words of chapter 6, verse 12, you look at both of those, waging the good warfare. Waging the good warfare, fighting the good fight. What is he talking about? Is this a rebellion? Is it being a part of a Roman army or something? No, it's obviously the Christian fight. The the great occupation that we're a part of even today. Paul would say in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 26, using another analogy, not only from athletics, but also from the military, he would say that I don't fight or I don't beat the air. In other words, as many people think about, I'm not shadow boxing. This is not a hypothetical battle we're involved in. It is a literal fight to the death. It is a spiritual struggle that we're involved in. And so I'm not fighting uncertainly. It's a direct object that I have in mind. And that ought to be our frame of reference as well. I believe that Paul died as he lived staunchly believing in Christ, in the message of Christianity. And as part of that cause, he was not just a soldier, but also a recruiter. Some of you know what it's like to serve the time and maybe choose to inspire others or encourage others to be a part of that as well. As Christians, it's not enough just for me to want to be saved and enjoy the blessings of Christianity, although we do. We're also on the outlook for others who have not started in the army of God, who also need the blessings that rival again any that a earthly military can offer there. As I think about Paul being a great veteran in the Lord's army, I want to think about some things that made him great, looking at what the Bible pictures about his life and about his values. I hope you'll study these along with me, maybe take some notes there. If I'm going to be a great veteran like he was, I will be number one, loyal to my commanding officer. Those of you in different branches of the military probably could tell tales about different ones who were your superiors. Some of you have great respect. In fact, you get a little moist in the eye thinking about those and maybe great things they did and the wonderful inspiration they were. Others of you, it's not tears of respect, but maybe tears of remorse. This guy was awful and just a pain. And so I couldn't wait to get out of the service there. But Paul was loyal to his commanding officer. Friends, this was not a person. This was none other than the Lord himself. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 4, there's a reference there to the idea of no one who is entangled or enlisted, part of the Lord's army. You don't entangle yourselves in the affairs of this life. And the reason you don't do that is you want to please the one from who enlisted you. Think about that. If I'm engaged in warfare, I can't say, you know what, I'm going to take a week off. I'm going to take some vacation time. I'll be back. Carry on without me. I'll let you know when I'm coming back. It's not the way it works. I don't dictate to God when I'll be faithful to him and at what points in time I'll be active in his cause. He's commissioned me to be always involved there. And so Paul very clearly knew where the orders from headquarters were coming from. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, that classic passage, you'll see other verses from that section in just a moment. He's going to talk about being strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Paul's encouraging our activity, our battle, on the basis of who it is that is giving the commands there. Many soldiers are very loyal. They would follow an officer literally into fire, into water. It doesn't matter what the threat is. If you say go, I'm going to be there. I'll die trying perhaps, but I'm going. Paul literally could do that with God telling him where to go, following those orders as faithfully as he could. I want to be a faithful veteran in the Lord's army that way. What about willing to undergo hardship? In fact, in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 3, it's very clear that if I am in God's army, I must be willing to undergo or to endure hardship. It's not that everyone's going to suffer. Back in the first century especially, it wasn't so much if I was going to suffer, but when and how I was going to. If I'm willing to endure hardship for the cause of Christ. There was a song, I think it came out maybe 15, 20 years ago, entitled Letters from Home. You remember that song, any of you? Country song? I remember when I listened to that song the first time and a few times after that the humidity level in the room would rise and moisture would concentrate in my eyes and I would get a characteristic lump in my throat to think about what others were experiencing and some of their hardships and the privations and the deprivation when they're in a foreign field there. and how important it was to receive letters from home. And so hardship as a good soldier of Jesus. Some of us will do anything in the world to make the world like us and to want to go along with the world and not receive any persecution or anything like that. Sometimes you just can't do it. Paul chronicles a list of things up to this point in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 that he had experienced, all because of his enlisting in the army of God. You find some of those. Can I read a few of them for you? Starting again in verse 23. He says, in labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. From the Jews, 5 times I received 39 stripes, or 40 minus 1 there. 3 times I was beaten with rods, once stoned, 3 times shipwrecked, a night and day I've been in the deep. He talks about journeys and perils of waters and robbers and my own countrymen, Gentiles, city, wilderness, sea, false brethren. Literally, my environment is flooded with people who are against me, troubles and problems and trials galore there. On and on. He says in verse 27, weariness, toil, sleeplessness, hunger, thirst, fastings, cold, nakedness. And beyond even those things, the care or the anxiety of the churches, these brothers and sisters I love so much, I must be willing, you must, to undergo hardship, to experience even great trials in our service to God, if we would be an honorable veteran in his army there. Many of you know this next slogan there, Semper Fi, meaning always faithful. Marines, always faithful. When he would say, in addition to running the course and fighting the good fight, he says, I have kept the faith. I've kept it, been faithful. Paul would say, I'm sure like any of us, wasn't perfect in that. Hard to be consistently, in fact, perfectly faithful, but I've kept the faith. And may that be true of us. And may we, like in the book of Revelation, be able to say, be faithful unto death. And Jesus gives that promise, I will give you the crown of life. Always faithful, never forgetting the cause that I serve, never forgetting those who are like-minded, who also are in the same fight, holding the honor of the one that we're serving greater than our own personal comfort and things like that. That is in essence of what it is to be always faithful. I need to, like Paul, be alert to the adversary. When Paul talks about this fight or this conflict that we're in, if I could take you to 2 Corinthians 10 verse 3, he says, though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. We're going to say in chapter verse 4 there, our weapons of our warfare are not carnal. They're not fleshly. They're not material weapons at all, but they are mighty in God for pulling down strongholds. Paul, who are you fighting? Not any person. This is not a human conflict at all, but rather a spiritual one. If you look at Ephesians 6, the outline of the Christian armor that we're encouraged to always have on, he mentions the devil and how that he's the one we're battling. I need to make sure that it's not friendly fire. I'm not attacking you. And in fact, even those in the world that are against righteousness, the attack is not to them directly, but rather indirectly. The devil is our ongoing foe. I wish he could have been defeated in the first century. I wish he'd just get tired and give up on me and give up on you. He's not going to do it. With our last measure of strength, may we fight him and resist him. References in Acts 5 and Acts 23 also about fighting against God. You know what? Some people don't really know where the fight is. And so they're not waging the good warfare. Rather, they're fighting against God when they ought to be channeling those energies into fighting and resisting the devil. Make sure that you know who the adversary is. I think Paul had that very clear in mind. No wonder he was effective as a good soldier of Jesus Christ and effectively equipped. There are references outside of Ephesians chapter 6 there to other places where it talks about us having the armor of God, not only just wearing it, but utilizing it in the way that he wants us to. We looked at that one there in 2 Corinthians 10. As you think about the full armor, we often sing in that song, the panoply. That's from a word in the Greek, the panoplia, the full armor. We're not leaving an unguarded place. There is protective armor, and there is that which is, as in the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God, that is aggressive, that we're on the attack. We're using the Spirit's power to make a difference in the world, to cut out error, falsehood, all that stands against God, and to advocate and to be aggressively promoting the truth that in Jesus Christ will save. Let me encourage you, as you would any soldier that may be involved in battle, it's not enough to have the armor at your disposal. It's not enough just to know how to wear it. It's not enough to use it most of the time, but all the time. There was a story came about this past week of a very tragic accident. Guy was up 50 or more floors, dropped just a tape measure, accidental. I don't think that was intentional at all. Guy on the ground evidently didn't have his hard hat on. It falls, hits him in the head, and kills him. I know that's not a battle scene at all, but the idea of the helmet there to protect us all the time. I need to appreciate how God has equipped me. Doesn't want me to succumb to the adversary. Has given me everything I need in defense of myself and in the propagation of the gospel. And so the question is, how are we doing at utilizing it? Not one piece of armor can we decide to jettison or that we're no longer in need of. And the wonderful promise is, as I do that, and if I do that, I will be honored at last. I'll be honored. And that great honor is something that transcends anything that a human tribunal could give to me. We have soldiers that have been decorated that may still proudly, some of you very humbly, would show a person or talk about some of those things. You know, some of the people that have never been honored may have been the bravest, the most courageous in battle. Some of them may have taken a bullet or maybe jumped on a landmine to save their buddies, and in fact they did that, and then later all of them were killed. No one really knew about that. When I act in service to God, when I'm part of His army, the promise is that I would be able to say like the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4, finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, not to me only, but to all those who love His appearing. In our own military, as in most other countries in the world, there is maybe a hierarchy of awards. There's a kind of a tier of different levels of honor, depending on how long a person served or what they've done. But you know what Paul says about this reward from God, this honor that comes from the Almighty? This crown that I have isn't mine alone. In fact, if you're in that army, you're going to get it. You will be honored, not just in a brief ceremony, not just in a one-time thing, but the idea of gathering around that throne, as Brother James prayed about, eternally, forever, relishing the great victory that has been secured by our commander-in-chief there. I must think about in the long term what it means to have that promise of God and how that rivals or certainly is superior to anything that I might ever enjoy in life. Veteran of the Lord's army, it is important that I establish and esteem this. Some of us could never be qualified, maybe through physical or mental or other limitations, to serve in our own country, in our armed forces there. Some wanted to and couldn't. Others maybe look for an opportunity not to serve. But every one of us, God says, I want you on my side. You've been drafted, but don't dodge it. You know, in different times, it's been very attractive to want to get out of that duty, especially when maybe the more dangerous hot spots are there. There's a couple of guys, let me give you their names. It's not that easy to pronounce or spell, Epaphroditus and Archippus. You find them respectively in Philippians chapter 2, verse 25, and also in Philemon, verse 2. Paul called these two men that we know very little about, incidentally, my fellow soldiers. Paul, what do you know about the military? Did you ever serve? No. Paul, were you ever up close and personal with soldiers? Well, yes, as a matter of fact. Well, tell me about that. Well, I was chained to them several times. They were responsible for guarding me when I had my several different incarcerations. That's probably about the extent of Paul's activity in the military. But you know what? I am a soldier. These men I'm acknowledging also are soldiers. That means we are fellow soldiers. What army? God's, the Lord's army. And so that's the best one. That's the one that you and I are privileged to be a part of. Do you know that there's no such thing as a person being a maybe soldier, a possible soldier? This doesn't happen. And likewise the same with a Christian. Imagine going to someone and saying, well, did you serve in the military? It's a long story. I'm not sure. I may have. And it's not that I've got a bad memory. I thought I signed up and it was kind of unclear, and so I don't know. I may have. That just doesn't happen, does it? I know sometimes people volunteer, and you've got kind of these volunteers that just kind of jump in, but they're really not going to get any kind of acknowledgement or pay or rewards if they do that. There's no sense in which I can be a maybe Christian, a possible Christian. I think I might have one time, or I think I am, or someone told me I was. I don't know. I'm going to be a veteran in the Lord's army. I've got to know whose side I'm on, and it matters. And I can be assured of that. And I have a process that is uniform. In other words, you go through the same one I do, and we all go through the same one folks in the first century did. And so there are no special circumstances. No one has an exemption from these. And have you done that? Are you a New Testament Christian because you know that you believe in the right person, Jesus Christ? John 8, verse 24, you have confessed that, Matthew 10, 32, with your lips, that he is Christ, the Son of God. You have repented. Those on the day of Pentecost were told to do that in Acts 2, 37 and 38. They were baptized so that their sins could be remitted or washed away. At that point in time, they were saved. They were added to the Lord's church, Acts 2, 47. They were required at that point, as you and I continue to be apprised of the importance of our faithfulness, our ongoing devotion, our radical commitment to Jesus Christ. So when I do that, I can have the assurance that I'm in that army and that everything God has said as far as privileges and rewards will be coming my way. Contingent again on that faithfulness. Someone says, and our own military folks go AWOL. There have been some dishonorable discharges. I'm aware of that. Please know that once you're in the Lord's army, you can do that. You can defect. It is possible to go from being in good standing to not. And if you do that, let me tell you something. The good news is that God is more forgiving than Uncle Sam. If you truly are penitent, the door is open. The way back home is possible, and forgiveness can be yours again, so that you do not lose that fabulous reward that he's got in place for you. How's your heart today? Where are you in the Lord's army? Are any changes? Do you need to understand God has called you and you must enlist by obedience? Are you ready to come back home and to realize that deserting the cause or being a half-hearted soldier is just as bad as not being one at all? If you want to rectify that situation, God is ready to receive you. We're going to stand and encourage you as we sing this song together. Is a word dearer far than any message man ever heard. Pure was the mind of Christ.